Mark pulled back the curtains and felt his stomach turn. Outside his window, the Detroit winter was raging with a violence he had not seen in years. But that was not what made Mark's blood run cold. It was the figure stumbling up his walkway. It was a woman. She was walking like a ghost, swaying violently against the gale, and she was terrified. Mark squinted, pressing his face to the freezing glass. She was not wearing a winter coat. She was wrapped in a thin, torn cardigan that offered zero protection against the -10-degree air. But the worst part was her feet. She was barefoot. Her bare skin was purple against the white snow, leaving a trail of staggering footsteps behind her. "My God," Mark whispered. Mark's hand hovered over the door handle. Every instinct told him not to get involved. Just as she reached his porch steps, her legs gave out. She did not catch herself. She just collapsed face first into the drift, her long dark hair fanning out like a halo in the slush. She did not move again. Mark did not think. He did not remember the eviction notice taped to his front door that demanded $3,000 by Friday. He did not think about the interview at Vanguard Logistics the next morning. That was the only thing standing between him and homelessness. He threw the door open and sprinted out into the blizzard. The cold hit him like a physical punch. He dropped to his knees beside her. Up close, she looked even worse. Her skin was the color of ash. Her dark hair was matted with ice and mud. She was shivering so hard it looked like a seizure. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Mark shouted over the wind. She did not answer. Her eyes were rolled back, her breathing shallow and rattling. This was not just a homeless person looking for a bed. This was a woman in the final stages of hypothermia. If he left her here for 5 more minutes, she would be dead. Mark looked back at his warm, dimly lit apartment where his 7-year-old daughter, Chloe, was sleeping. He knew the rule of the neighborhood. Do not open your door to strangers. He knew he had to be up at 6 o'clock to iron his only suit and review his presentation. He knew he could not afford a hospital bill, let alone feed another mouth. But then he looked at her bare, bleeding feet. "Not on my watch," he grunted. He already knew this choice was going to cost him something. He just didn't know how much yet. Mark slid his arms under her frozen body, completely limp and drained of strength. He hauled her up, groaning with the effort, and kicked his front door open. He dragged her inside, away from the death waiting on the porch, and collapsed with her onto the living room rug. The heat from the apartment hit them, and the woman let out a low, painful moan. Mark scrambled up and slammed the door, locking it against the wind. The silence of the room felt deafening after the roaring storm. "Daddy?" A small, sleepy voice came from the hallway. Mark turned to see Chloe standing there, clutching her teddy bear. Her eyes went wide when she saw the stranger shivering violently on the floor. "Is she dead?" "No, sweetie. She is just very cold," Mark said, his voice trembling slightly. Adrenaline was still coursing through his veins. "I need you to be brave for me, okay? Go get the big quilt from my bed, the thick one. Run." Chloe nodded and sprinted to the bedroom. Mark knelt back down beside the woman. He gently peeled the wet, freezing cardigan off her shoulders. Her skin was ice cold to the touch. She was wearing a silk blouse underneath that was torn and stained with grease, but Mark did not have time to analyze her wardrobe. He needed to get her core temperature up fast. Chloe returned with the quilt, dragging it behind her. Mark wrapped the stranger in it, tucking the edges under her shivering body like a cocoon. He ran to the kitchen and turned on the stove. He grabbed the last can of tomato soup from the cupboard, the one he had been saving for his own dinner. He stared at the red label for a second. His stomach rumbled painfully. He had not eaten since breakfast. This soup was supposed to give him the energy to nail the interview tomorrow. He looked back at the woman on the floor. Her lips were still blue. Mark sighed, grabbed the can opener, and cracked the lid. "2 spoons tonight, Chloe," he called out. "We are sharing." 10 minutes later, the apartment was filled with the smell of warm tomato soup. Mark propped the woman's head up on a pillow. Her eyes fluttered open. They were gray, clouded with confusion and fear. She flinched when Mark brought the spoon to her lips. "It is okay," Mark whispered, his voice soft and steady. "You are safe. I am Mark. This is Chloe. You are in a house. Drink this." The woman swallowed the soup desperately. She ate like she was starving. She did not speak. She just trembled and ate until the bowl was empty. As the warmth spread through her, her eyelids began to droop. She mumbled something that sounded like, "They took it all," but the words were slurred and heavy. Within moments, she was asleep, passed out from pure exhaustion on Mark's rug. Mark sat back on his heels and rubbed his face. He looked at the clock on the wall. It was now 8:45 in the evening. He walked over to the small kitchen table where his laptop and a stack of papers were waiting. This was his war room. He had spent weeks researching Vanguard Logistics. He knew their supply chain issues, their declining stock value, and their desperate need for a new operations manager. The interview tomorrow was not just a job application. It was a lifeline. If he got the job, the signing bonus would clear the $3,000 he owed his landlord. If he did not, he and Chloe would be in a shelter by Monday. Mark looked at his notes. He needed to memorize the quarterly figures. He needed to practice his opening statement. He needed to be sharp. But then he looked at the woman on the floor. The floor was hard, and drafts crept in under the baseboards. But she looked broken. "Daddy, where are you going to sleep?" Chloe asked, finishing the last drop of soup from her small bowl. Mark looked at his bedroom door, then at the stranger, then at the uncomfortable wooden chair at the kitchen table. He knew what his late wife Sarah would have done. Sarah never turned anyone away. Even when the cancer was taking her, she worried more about the nurses having comfortable shoes than her own pain. Mark missed her so much it felt like a hole in his chest. "I am going to sleep right here, on the chair," Mark said, forcing a smile. "I have to study anyway. I probably would not have slept much." "But your back will hurt," Chloe said, her brow furrowed. "I will be fine, Peanut. You take the couch. Let's give the guests the bed." "The bed?" Chloe whispered. "But that is your bed. She needs it more than I do tonight," Mark said firmly. He walked over and lifted the sleeping woman again. She was dead weight, limp and fragile. He carried her into his small bedroom and laid her down on the mattress that still smelled faintly of Sarah's lavender detergent. He covered her up, turned off the light, and closed the door. When he came back out, the reality of his situation hit him. He was exhausted. He was hungry. He had a stranger in his house. And he had 10 hours to save his life. Mark sat down at the kitchen table and turned on a small desk lamp. The light illuminated the dark circles under his eyes. He picked up his resume. His hands were shaking. "Focus, Mark," he whispered to himself. "Focus." But as the wind howled outside, threatening to tear the roof off, Mark could not shake the feeling that he had just made a terrible mistake. He was a drowning man trying to save someone else, and there was a very real chance they were both going to sink. The night did not pass. It crawled. Mark sat at the small, wobbly kitchen table, the yellow light of the desk lamp burning into his retinas. He read the same paragraph about Vanguard Logistics' quarterly earnings 4 times, but the words kept swimming in front of his eyes. His back screamed in protest against the hard wooden chair, and the cold draft from the window wrapped around his ankles like shackles. By 3 o'clock in the morning, Mark's head was heavy. He rested it on his crossed arms, just for a second, he told himself. Just to rest his eyes. He woke up with a gasp. Sunlight, weak, gray, winter sunlight, was filtering through the blinds. Mark jerked upright, his neck snapping with a sharp pain. He looked at the clock on the stove. 7:15. "No, no, no!" Mark hissed, scrambling out of the chair. He had overslept by an hour. He needed to be on the bus by 8 o'clock to make it downtown by 9. He hadn't showered. He hadn't ironed his shirt. He hadn't made Chloe's lunch. He sprinted to the bathroom, splashing freezing water on his face because the water heater took 20 minutes to warm up, and he did not have 20 minutes. He looked in the mirror. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked like a man who was losing a fight with life, because he was. "Pull it together, Mark," he whispered to his reflection. "You are a professional. You are the best candidate. You are not a charity case." He rushed back out to the living room, grabbing his white dress shirt from the back of the sofa where he had laid it out. But as he turned, he stopped. The bedroom door was open. The stranger was standing there. She looked different this morning. The terror was gone, replaced by a quiet, haunting shame. She had folded the quilt neatly and placed it on the bed. She was still wearing her torn, stained clothes, but she stood with a strange kind of dignity, her hands clasped in front of her. "I am sorry," she said softly. Her voice was raspy, damaged from the cold. "I did not mean to intrude. I don't remember much of last night." Mark was hopping on one foot, trying to pull on his dress sock. "You didn't intrude." I brought you in. You were freezing. The woman looked around the apartment. She saw the peeling paint. She saw the empty cupboards that Mark had left open in his panic. She saw the eviction notice that Mark had crumpled up, which had fallen out of his pocket and was now lying on the floor like a piece of trash. She walked over and picked it up. Her eyes scanned the red letters. Mark snatched the paper from her hand, his face flushing with embarrassment. Don't worry about that. It's just a mistake. Paperwork error. The woman looked at him, her gray eyes piercing. She knew it wasn't an error. You gave me your bed, she said, her voice trembling slightly. And you are about to lose your home. I am not going to lose it, Mark said, his voice rising with stress as he buttoned his shirt with fumbling fingers. I have a meeting today, a big one. If I get this job, everything changes. I need to get ready. He ran to the kitchen to boil water for instant coffee. He needed the caffeine to function. He grabbed the kettle, but his hands were shaking so bad that he clipped the edge of his mug. Brown liquid sloshed over the rim and splashed onto the cuff of his white shirt. Damn it, Mark shouted, the frustration finally boiling over. He slammed the mug down. Damn it, damn it! He grabbed a rag and furiously scrubbed at the stain, but it only smeared into a light brown blotch on his wrist. He didn't have another shirt. This was it. He was going to walk into a corporate boardroom looking like he couldn't even drink coffee without making a mess. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was the woman. Stop, she said gently. Rubbing it makes it set. Do you have vinegar? Mark looked at her, blinking back tears of pure exhaustion. Under the sink, she moved with a surprising speed for someone who had been half dead 12 hours ago. She found the vinegar and a clean cloth. She took Mark's wrist and dabbed at the stain with precise, methodical movements. You have an interview, she stated, not asking. She gestured with her head toward the laptop on the table, where the Vanguard Logistics logo was glowing on the screen. Vanguard, Mark sighed, watching the stain fade. Operations manager. It's a long shot. They want someone with an MBA and 10 years of experience. I have a community college degree and a resume full of bad luck. Operations is not about degrees, the woman murmured, almost to herself. It is about seeing the bottleneck before it breaks. It is about people. She finished cleaning his cuff. It wasn't perfect, but it was barely noticeable. There. Keep your jacket on and no one will know. Mark looked at her. For a second, he saw something in her face. A spark of intelligence that didn't fit the homeless narrative. But he didn't have time to question it. Chloe! Mark yelled. Bus is here in 10 minutes! Boots on! Chloe ran into the room, backpack on, looking between Mark and the woman. Is she staying? Mark froze. He had to leave. He couldn't leave a stranger alone in his apartment with his few valuables, his laptop, his TV. But he also couldn't kick her out into the snow. It was still 5 degrees outside. She had no shoes. If he put her out now, everything he did last night was for nothing. He looked at the woman. I have to go. I have to take Chloe to school and then go straight to the city. I won't be back until 2. The woman nodded slowly. I will go. I have imposed enough. No, Mark said firmly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his spare key. It was a crazy thing to do. Reckless. But he looked at her eyes, and he didn't see a thief. He saw a young woman. He saw a human being. Stay, Mark said, pressing the key into her rough, cold hand. There is not much food. But there is heat. Just lock the door if you leave. He pointed to the wall near the fridge. And there is an old landline phone on the kitchen wall. I keep it for emergencies. It still works if you need to call anyone. The woman looked at the key in her palm as if it were a diamond. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked up at Mark, and her eyes were wet. Why? She whispered. You don't know me. You have nothing, and you are giving me this. Mark grabbed his coat and ushered Chloe toward the door. He turned back one last time. Because I know what it feels like to be locked out, Mark said. Good luck today. I hope your day is better than yesterday. And with that, he was gone. The door clicking shut behind him. Inside the quiet apartment, Eleanor Vance, the CEO of Vanguard Logistics, a woman worth $4 billion who had been stripped of her identity, her phone, and her dignity by carjackers the night before, stood alone in the center of the room. She looked at the cheap, scratched key in her hand. She looked at the half-empty mug of instant coffee Mark had left behind. She walked over to the table and looked at his notes. She saw his handwritten strategy for her company. It was rough, it was simple, and it was brilliant. She sat down in Mark's chair. A single tear rolled down her cheek, cutting through the grime on her face. She wasn't crying because of the trauma. She was crying because for the first time in years, someone had treated her like a person, not a checkbook. But then she saw the clock. 8:15. "He is going to be late," she whispered. Mark was currently running for the bus, his breath pluming in the icy air, holding Chloe's hand. He didn't know that he had left the most powerful woman in the city sitting at his kitchen table. All he knew was that he was tired, his shirt was damp, and he was walking into the lion's den with nothing but a prayer. The bus ride downtown was a 40-minute exercise in nausea. The vehicle was overheated, smelling of wet wool and diesel fumes, lurching through the slush-covered streets of Detroit. Mark stood the entire way, clutching the overhead rail with a white-knuckled grip, terrified that sitting down might wrinkle the back of his trousers. He closed his eyes and silently rehearsed his opening statement, over and over, until the words lost their meaning. "I am the solution to your logistics bottleneck. My experience in supply chain management." It sounded hollow. It sounded like a lie from a man who had eaten tomato soup for dinner and slept in a wooden chair. When Mark finally stepped off the bus in front of the Vanguard Logistics headquarters, he felt small. The building was a monolith of steel and glass, shooting 50 stories into the gray winter sky. It looked like a fortress built to keep people like him out. He checked his reflection in the revolving doors. His face was pale. The dark circles under his eyes looked like bruises, and the vinegar smell on his wrist was faint, but undeniable. He took a deep breath of the freezing air, straightened his tie, and pushed through the doors. The lobby was silent and smelled of expensive sanitizer and leather. The receptionist, a young woman with a headset that looked more expensive than Mark's car, barely glanced up as he approached. "Name?" she asked, her fingers flying across a keyboard. "Mark Reynolds. I have a 9 o'clock with Mr. Sterling." She paused, her eyes flickering down to Mark's shoes. They were old leather, scuffed at the toes, wet from the snow. She didn't say anything, but the judgment was loud and clear. "Take the elevator to the 40th floor. Have a seat in the waiting area." The 40th floor was even more intimidating. The carpet was so thick it swallowed his footsteps. Mark sat on the edge of a sleek modern sofa that was too low to be comfortable. And then, he waited. Mark's appointment was for 9 o'clock, but the minutes dragged into hours. 9:15, 9:45, 10:30. He watched the other candidates get called in and walk out, looking defeated. Mark sat there, his stomach twisting in knots, sweating in his heavy coat. He didn't know if it was a test of patience or just arrogance, but by the time the office door finally opened, it was nearly 11 o'clock. That 2-hour delay felt like torture. He wasn't alone. Across from him sat 2 other candidates. They were younger, maybe 25 or 26. They wore slim-fit suits that looked tailored. They were scrolling on the newest smartphones, looking bored, radiating the casual confidence of people who had never worried about an eviction notice. Mark pulled out his folder. His hands were shaking. He tried to review his notes on Vanguard's shipping routes, but his brain felt like it was filled with cotton. The lack of sleep was catching up to him. His eyelids felt heavy. He pinched his leg, hard, just to stay alert. "Focus, Mark. Do it for Chloe." "Mr. Reynolds?" The voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. Mark jumped up. Standing in the doorway of a corner office was David Sterling. He was a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a factory. Perfect hair, perfect teeth, and a suit that cost more than Mark's annual rent. He didn't offer a handshake. He just turned his back and walked into his office. "Come in. Keep it brief." Mark followed him in. The office was massive, with a panoramic view of the snow-covered city. Sterling sat behind a glass desk that had nothing on it but a laptop and Mark's resume. He didn't gesture for Mark to sit, so Mark stood awkwardly for a moment before taking the chair opposite him. Sterling didn't look up. He was reading Mark's resume with a frown, holding the paper by the very corner as if it were contaminated. "There is a gap here," Sterling said, his voice flat. 2 years. Between the warehouse manager position and whatever this freelance consulting is. "Yes," Mark said, his throat dry. My wife. She became ill. I took time off to care for her until she passed. The consulting work was to keep my skills sharp while I— So, you have been out of the corporate loop for 24 months, Sterling interrupted, finally looking up. His eyes were cold, calculating. In this industry, Mr. Reynolds, 2 years is a lifetime. Technologies change. Protocols change. I am aware, Mark said, leaning forward, trying to channel the energy he didn't have. But I have studied Vanguard's current challenges. I know you are losing 12% on the Midwest distribution routes because of outdated routing software. I have a plan to fix that. I wrote it down. Mark reached for his folder to pull out the strategy he had worked on all night. I don't need to see your homework, Sterling scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. He leaned back, inspecting Mark. Let's be honest, Mark. Can I call you Mark? You look tired. You look defeated. Mark stiffened. I had a rough night, sir. The storm. We all had the storm, Sterling snapped. I was here at 6 a.m. My other candidates were here early. You walked in 2 minutes late, smelling like vinegar and looking like you slept on a park bench. The insult hit Mark like a slap in the face. He felt the heat rise up his neck. I assure you, my appearance does not reflect my work ethic, Mark said, his voice trembling with suppressed anger. I am a single father. I am fighting for my family. If you hire me, you won't find anyone who works harder, because no one needs this more than I do. Sterling laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. That is exactly the problem. Desperation smells, Mark. And it smells bad for business. We need winners at Vanguard. We need sharks. You? Sterling tossed Mark's resume across the desk. It slid off the glass and landed on the floor near Mark's wet shoes. You are just looking for a life raft. We are not a charity. Mark stared at the paper on the floor. The humiliation was total. He thought about picking it up, but that would just mean bowing down to this man. He thought about Chloe waiting for him to come home with good news. He thought about the eviction notice. Is that a no? Mark whispered. It is a get out, Sterling said, turning his attention back to his laptop. And take your trash with you. Mark sat there for 1 second longer, his heart breaking in his chest. It was over. The fight was lost. He stood up slowly, his knees popping. He didn't pick up the resume. He just turned to the door, his vision blurring with tears he refused to let fall. He reached for the door handle. Bam! The double doors to the office flew open with such force that they banged against the walls. Mark stumbled back. Sterling jumped up from his chair. What the hell? Security! But it wasn't security. Standing in the doorway was a woman. She was flanked by 2 large men in suits who looked like Secret Service agents, but they weren't restraining her. They were guarding her. She was wearing a pristine charcoal gray power suit that fit her perfectly. Her dark hair was pulled back into an elegant, sharp bun. Her face was scrubbed clean, revealing sharp, aristocratic features and eyes that burned with a terrifying intelligence. But Mark recognized her instantly. He recognized the tilt of her head. He recognized the gray eyes. It was the woman from the snow. The woman who had eaten his soup. The woman who had slept in his bed while he shivered in a chair. Eleanor? Mark gasped, the name slipping out before he could stop it. Sterling's face went white. He scrambled around his desk, almost tripping over his own feet. Ms. Vance, we weren't expecting you. I thought the news said you were missing. We heard about the carjacking. Eleanor Vance, the CEO and founder of Vanguard Logistics, didn't even look at Sterling. She walked straight past him, her heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. She stopped directly in front of Mark. The room was deadly silent. The receptionists were gathering at the glass wall, watching in shock. Eleanor looked Mark up and down. She saw the stain on his wrist. She saw the exhaustion in his face. She saw the man who had saved her life when she was nothing but a nuisance on his porch. You left your coffee, Eleanor said. Her voice was no longer raspy. It was clear, commanding, and warm. She reached into her pocket and pulled out Mark's cheap, scratched house key. She held it up. And you gave me this. Mark was paralyzed. I don't understand. I am the woman you saved, she said simply. Then she turned slowly to face Sterling. Sterling was sweating now, profusely. Ms. Vance, I I was just handling this candidate. He was unqualified. He was barely presentable. I was just escorting him out. I heard, Eleanor said. Her voice dropped an octave, becoming dangerously quiet. I was listening from the hallway. You told him that desperation smells. It was a figure of speech, Sterling stammered, his arrogant smile gone, replaced by pure panic. Eleanor walked over to the resume lying on the floor. She bent down, a graceful, deliberate movement, and picked it up. She smoothed the paper out and placed it gently on Sterling's glass desk. You are right, David. Desperation does have a smell, Eleanor said. But so does integrity. And apparently, you have lost the ability to smell either. She turned back to Mark, her expression softening. Mark, last night I had nothing. No ID, no money, no name. I was invisible. Hundreds of people walked past me. You were the only one who stopped. You fed me your own dinner. You gave me your bed. You risked your own comfort, even though you had this meeting today. Even though you are terrified of losing your home. She looked at Sterling again, her eyes hardening like steel. David, you look for sharks to run this company. That is why our turnover rate is 40%. I don't need sharks. I need humans. I need people who can see a crisis and run toward it, not away from it. Sterling swallowed hard. Ms. Vance, surely you aren't suggesting— I am not suggesting anything, Eleanor interrupted. I am informing you. Pack your things, David. You are relieved of your duties, effective immediately. What? You can't, Sterling shouted, his face turning red. Over a bum? Careful, Eleanor warned, her voice cutting like a knife. That bum is the only reason I'm alive to fire you today. She pointed to the door. Security will escort you out. Sterling looked at the guards, then at Mark, then at Eleanor. He realized he was small. He grabbed his briefcase and stormed out, muttering curses, pushed along by the guards. The silence returned to the office, but the air felt lighter. Eleanor turned back to Mark. She smiled, and for the first time, Mark saw the gentle warmth he had glimpsed in his kitchen. I read your notes, Mark, she said. The ones on your kitchen table. Your strategy for the Midwest distribution. Mark blinked, his brain trying to catch up. You read them? They were brilliant, she said. Simple, efficient, honest, exactly like you. She extended her hand. The operations manager position is yours, Mark, if you want it, and the signing bonus, I think we can triple it. Consider it back pay for the hotel services provided last night. Mark looked at her hand. He thought about the eviction notice. He thought about Chloe. He thought about the cold wind and the warm soup. He felt the tears finally spill over, hot tracks running down his tired face. He reached out and shook the hand of the billionaire he had saved. I don't know what to say, Mark whispered. Say yes. Eleanor smiled. Then let's go get some real coffee. I believe you owe me a breakfast where I don't pass out halfway through. Mark walked out of the Vanguard Logistics building at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The blizzard had passed, leaving the city covered in a blinding, pristine white blanket of snow. The air was still biting cold, -5 degrees, but Mark did not feel it. He unbuttoned his coat and let the wind hit his chest. For the first time in 3 years, the cold did not feel like a threat. It just felt like winter. In his pocket, folded neatly inside a crisp corporate envelope, was an offer letter. It detailed a salary that was more than Mark had made in the last 5 years combined. It included full medical benefits for him and Chloe, and, perhaps most importantly, it included a cashier's check for the signing bonus, a sum that would not only clear his debt to the landlord, but would pay his rent for the next 12 months. He did not take a taxi home, even though he could afford one now. He took the bus. He sat in the back, looking out the window at the gray streets of Detroit, watching the people bundled up at the stops, fighting their own silent battles. He looked at his hands, the same hands that had dragged a dying woman out of the snow less than 24 hours ago. He realized that the distance between sitting on this bus and sitting in that corner office was not about intelligence or hard work. It was about grace. It was about the moment you choose to open the door when everyone else locks it. When he finally reached his apartment complex, the sun was beginning to set. The building looked the same, shabby, peeling paint, gray siding. But to Mark, it looked like a castle. He walked up the steps, stepping over the exact spot where Eleanor Vance had collapsed. The snow there was still disturbed, a frozen imprint of the near tragedy that had saved his life. He stopped at the ground floor apartment first, knocking on Mrs. Higgins's door. The elderly neighbor had picked Chloe up from the bus stop when Mark didn't make it back in time. Chloe ran out into the hallway, her backpack bouncing. "Daddy, you're late." "I know, Peanut. I'm sorry," Mark said, taking her hand. They walked up the stairs together. Mark unlocked their door. The apartment was quiet. Chloe ran to sit on the floor, keeping her coat on because of the cold. She looked up, her eyes wide and anxious. She had spent the whole day worrying. She knew about the eviction notice. Children always know. "Daddy?" she whispered, standing up. Did it go okay? Do we have to start packing?" Mark closed the door and locked it. He looked at the thermostat on the wall. It was set to 60 degrees. The air in the room was stale and chilly. Mark walked over to the thermostat. He pressed the up button. Beep, beep, beep. He held it down until the digital numbers read 72. The furnace in the basement kicked on with a low, comforting rumble. "No, baby," Mark said, his voice thick with emotion. "We don't have to pack." He walked over to the front door, where the orange eviction notice was still taped, mocking them. He peeled the tape back slowly. The paper made a sharp crinkling sound in the quiet room. He didn't crumble it this time. He folded it into a small square. He would keep it. He would frame it. He would put it in a drawer to remind him forever of how close they had come to the edge. He turned to Chloe and knelt down. "I got the job, Peanut. And I met a friend. A very nice friend who liked the soup." Chloe's face broke into a smile that lit up the gloomy room. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. Mark held her tight, squeezing his eyes shut. This was the victory. Not the money. Not the title. It was the weight lifting off his daughter's shoulders. "We are safe," Mark whispered into her hair. "We are safe." 6 months later, the turnaround at Vanguard Logistics became a case study in business schools across the country. But the analysts got the reason wrong. They thought it was the new software or the route optimization. They didn't know that the real change started in the break room. Mark Reynolds, the new director of operations, had implemented a new policy. No one at Vanguard, from the janitors to the junior executives, would ever earn less than a living wage. He set up an emergency fund for employees facing sudden crises, funded anonymously by the CEO herself. On a warm Saturday in July, a black sedan pulled up to a modest house in the suburbs. It wasn't a mansion, but it had a big backyard and a swing set. Mark walked out onto the porch, holding a glass of lemonade. "She is here!" Chloe yelled, sprinting across the green grass. Eleanor Vance stepped out of the car. She looked healthier now, stronger, though she's still moving carefully. She wasn't wearing a power suit. She was wearing a simple sundress and a sun hat. She opened her arms, and Chloe ran into them, hugging her like a big sister. "Careful, wild one," Eleanor laughed, hugging her back. She looked up at Mark standing on the porch. They shared a look, a silent communication between two people who had seen each other at their absolute worst and had lifted each other up. Eleanor walked up the steps. "The quarterly numbers look good, Mark," she said, winking. "But your lemonade looks better." "We aim to please, boss," Mark smiled, handing her the glass. They sat on the porch swing, watching Chloe play in the sprinklers. "You know," Eleanor said softly, looking out at the peaceful street, "I used to think my success would be the buildings I built, the stock price." She took a sip of the lemonade. "Now, I think what really matters is that I didn't freeze to death on a porch in Detroit because one man decided to be human." Mark shook his head. "You saved me, Eleanor. I was drowning. We saved each other," she corrected him. "That is how it works. That is the only way it works." Mark thought he was sacrificing his future to save a stranger. He didn't know he was actually saving himself. In a world obsessed with status, remember this. The hand you hold out to help someone up is often the same hand that pulls you out of the darkness. True wealth isn't what you have in the bank. It's who you are when no one is watching. If you believe kindness always finds its way back, hit that like button right now. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that matter.